Alright, good morning everyone. So we have here today for another lesson. So we have here the GMO or the genetically modified organisms, science, health, and society. We have also our lesson outline for this lesson. So the first is the introduction. The second one is how are GMOs made? The third one, are GMOs good or bad? And lastly, we have the applications of biotechnology in GMOs. So we have here our learning outcomes. So at the end of this lesson, the student will be able to define what is GMO, explain the basic principles of genetic engineering used in creating GMOs, describe the benefits and potential risks associated with GMO, and lastly, develop an awareness of how useful GMOs are to science, health, and to society. Alright, so what is GMO? GMO is a genetically modified organism, is an animal, plant, or microbe whose DNA has been altered using genetic engineering techniques. So for thousands of years, humans have used breeding methods to modify organisms. Corn, cattle, and even dogs have been selectively bred over generations to have a certain desired traits. So within the last few decades, however, the modern advances in biotechnology have allowed scientists to directly modify the DNA of microorganisms, crops, and animals. So, conventional methods of modifying plants and animals, selective breeding and crossbreeding can take a longer time. So, moreover, selective breeding and crossbreeding often produce mixed results. So, with unwanted traits appearing alongside desired characteristics. So, the specific targeted modification of DNA using biotechnology has allowed the scientists to avoid this problem and improve the genetic makeup of an organisms without unwanted characteristics tagging along with it. Alright, so I have provided an examples of genetically modified organisms. So we have the papaya. So Hawaii's papaya industry was on the brink of annihilation in late 1990s and early 20s. So with the red spot virus causing a 50% decrease in production of papaya, fortunately, the answer was found in genetically modified papaya resistant to the virus. So it saved papaya farmers worldwide. And the second one is the potato. So, potato is one of the most recent additions to the list of examples of genetically modified foods with full explanation. So, its use has been approved by the FDA or the Food and Drug Administration in 2015. Genetically modified potatoes offer several advantages like resistance to black spot, bruising, and browning, and containing less asparagine. This is significant because asparagine turns into acrylamide during frying, so which is suspected to be cancerogenic. And lastly, we have the tomato. So the first genetically modified tomato was called Flavor Savior. So it offered much longer shelf life than the original tomato. So the company that produced it went bankrupt just a few years later and was purchased by another. So they went to produce another type by adding another gene. So by allowing it tomatoes to be stored for over long periods of time. Alright, let's proceed. So how are GMOs made? the genetically modified Hawaiian papaya case study. So the Hawaiian papaya industry faced a crisis in the 1990s when a devastating disease called papaya ring spot virus, or the PRSV, has severely affected the papaya crops, leading to significant losses. So in response to this threat, scientists at the University of Hawaii developed a genetically modified papaya variety that was resistant to PRSB. So in identifying how are GMOs made, so here are the steps. So the first one is to determine whether genetic engineering is the most effective way to solve a plant's problem. The second one is to identify the gene or genetic material that could solve the problem. The third one is copy the trait from a donor organism and implant it into the plant's DNA. And lastly, plant the new seed and test it. So of course, now here are the steps of how GMOs are made. So you have first to determine if it is the right thing to do is to solve that plant's problem. Is it the most effective way? And the second one is to identify the gene or the material that could solve that problem. The third one is to you have to copy the trait from a donor organism and implant or transfer it into the plant's DNA. And lastly, you have to see the outcomes. You have to test it so that you will have your conclusions right after. Alright, so let's proceed to the next slide. So, are genetically modified organisms are good or is it bad? So we have here the benefits and potential risks of the genetically modified organism. So the genetically modified organisms foods include added nutrients, fewer pesticides, and cheaper prices. So it also enhances nutritional value and increase the crop yield. So it can enhance crop productivity by introducing new traits such as resistance to pests, diseases, and environmental conditions. So this can help to increase the food production and potentially address issues of global hunger and malnutrition. So genetically modified organisms can be engineered to have improved nutritional profiles. So for example, biofortified crops can be developed to contain higher levels of essential nutrients, addressing specific nutrient deficiencies in populations that rely heavily on a certain staple foods. And the last benefits is that the reduction in pesticide use. So some genetically modified organisms are engineered to be resistant to pests, reducing the need for chemical pesticides. So this can have a positive impact of by decreasing pesticide-related pollution and reducing the exposure of farmers and consumers to potentially harmful chemicals. So genetic engineering can provide crops with traits that help them withstand harsh environmental conditions such as drought, salinity, or extreme temperature. So this resilience could contribute to more sustainable agriculture in the face of the climate change. So we have also the potential risk of the genetically modified organisms. So the genetically modified organisms foods can be allergic reactions or increase the antibiotic resistance. So the gene flow where the genetically modified crops could mix with the traditional crops and introduce to new unwanted characteristics. So, and lastly, the terminator seeds, the idea of producing sterile plants from genetically modified seeds caused by a public outcry and stop the technology from being put to use. So, one of the main concerns of the potential um, risks of genetically modified organisms is that to the human health. While the extensive research has been conducted, that there is an ongoing debate regarding the long-term effects of consuming genetically modified organisms. But however, to date, there is no scientific consensus that GMOs or the genetically modified organisms are inherently harmful to the human health. So, while the GMOs or the genetically modified organisms can reduce pesticide, they may also have the unintended consequences for the ecosystem. So, for example, the pests can develop resistance to genetically engineered traits over time, so potentially leading to the emergence of more resistant or invasive species. So, critics argue that the genetically modified organisms can lead to increased corporate control over the food system. So, patents on genetically modified seeds and associated technologies can result in a concentration of power and restrict farmers' ability to save and exchange seeds, potentially impacting traditional agricultural practices. Alright, let's proceed to the next slide. So the applications of biotechnology and genetically modified organisms. So we have the transgenic organisms. So transgenic plants have been engineered for scientific research to create new colors in flowers and to create and improve crops. So plants are engineered to help discover the functions of a certain genes. So one way to do is to knock out the gene of interest and see what the phenotype develops. So another study is to attach the gene to a strong promoter and see what happens when it is overexpressed. So the transgenic organisms, which are genetically modified through the introduction of genes from the other species. So it has been developed to improve the crop plants. For example, genetically modified crops like insect-resistant, the Bt cotton, and herbicide-tolerant soybeans have been created to enhance pest-resistant and weed control, respectively. So biotechnology has been used to develop transgenic organisms with increased resistance to diseases. So in agriculture, this includes developing disease-resistant crops that can withstand viral, bacterial, or fungal infections, reducing the need for chemical treatments and crop losses. So, they additionally, transgenic organisms, particularly bacteria, yeast, and mammalian cell lines, are used in the production of pharmaceuticals through recombinant DNA technology. So they can be genetically modified to produce therapeutic proteins, antibodies, vaccine, and other pharmaceutical products. So overall, transgenic organisms have been explored for various environmental applications. Alright, so again, I have provided an example of transgenic organism, which is the Bt cotton. So as I said earlier that transgenic organisms, which are genetically modified through the introduction of genes from other species. So it has been developed to improve crop plants. For example, genetically modified crops like insect-resistant Bt cotton like this and herbicide-tolerant soybeans have been created to enhance pest resistance and weed control respectively. Alright, so we're bound to the last slide. How useful are GMOs, or the genetically modified organisms, to our science, health, and society? So, genetically modified organisms have the potential to increase the crop yields and improve the agricultural productivity by introducing traits like pest resistance, disease resistance, and tolerance to environmental stressors. Genetically modified crops can produce higher yields, ensuring a more abundant and stable food supply. So this is a particularly important for addressing food security challenges and feeding a growing global population. So it also improved the product shelf life and quality. So genetic modifications can extend to the shelf life of perishable foods, minimizing food waste. Genetically modified organisms can be designed to delay ripening or slow down the spoilage process, benefiting both consumers and the producers by reducing losses and increasing product quality. So it is also important to note that the use of genetically modified organisms should be also regulated, and thorough risk assessments should be conducted to address safety concerns, ethical considerations, and potential environmental impacts. Additionally, transparent communication with the public is very crucial to ensure the informed decision making and build trust in the use of genetically modified organisms. So, while recognizing the potential benefits of the genetically modified organisms to society, it is also important to consider, as I said earlier, the responsible regulation, thorough risk assessment, and transparent communication to really address the safety concerns and ensure a long-term environmental sustainability. So, overall, the public engagement and the education are very crucial to foster understanding and informed decision making regarding the use of genetically modified organisms. So indeed, the genetically modified organisms is very significant and is very useful in our daily lives, not just in the society but also to us individually. So by this, no, by the genetically modified organisms, um, it can ensure and store a more abundant and stable food supply so that it can supply to the growing global population. So this is particularly important for addressing the food security challenges. So indeed, um, genetically modified organism must use responsibly and have a thorough risk assessment so that this will be implemented or can be used properly and without the potential risk on it. So, and that would be all for my discussion about the genetically modified organisms, the science, health, and society. So, thank you for listening to my discussion, everyone. So, have a great day ahead. Thank you and God bless. Thank you for listening.